Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News and Indian Perspective on All India Radio. This is Anita Anand and with me is Aditi Lumba bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment and more. The headlines. Russia launches special military operation on Ukraine's eastern Donbas region. Russia claims it has destroyed 74 Ukrainian military facilities, including 11 air bases. Ukraine says it will defend its territory. US, EU and NATO condemn the military attacks in Ukraine. Evacuation plan for stranded Indian nationals in Ukraine being worked out, says External Affairs Ministry. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is scheduled to speak to Russian President Vladimir Putin shortly. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar discusses Ukraine's situation with High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy. Stock markets around the world tumble as Russia attacks Ukraine. And in cricket, India defeats Sri Lanka in first T20 of the three-match series in Lucknow. With the new Omicron variant of coronavirus causing concern, we appeal to our listeners to be vigilant and to get fully vaccinated and help others, including children between 15 and 18 years, to get vaccinated. Please continue to follow these three simple steps to stay safe. Wear a face mask, maintain 2 gaz ki duri for social distancing, focus on hand and face hygiene. For any COVID-related information and guidance, contact national helpline numbers 011-2397-8046 and 1075. And now the news in detail. Russia has launched a special military operation in Ukraine's eastern Donbas region on Thursday. Russian forces entered Ukrainian territory from Crimea. Ballistic missile attacks were also launched on a number of Ukrainian cities this morning. The Russian president on Thursday announced an operation in Ukraine in a televised address. In a statement shortly before 300 hours GMT, Mr. Putin announced his decision of a military operation in Ukraine. In his address, Russian President Vladimir Putin has urged Ukrainian soldiers who are facing off Russian-backed rebels to lay down weapons and return to their home. However, Mr. Putin said Russia did not plan to occupy Ukraine but wants that Moscow's response would be instant if anyone tries to take on Russia. Meanwhile, moments later, attacks were reported on Ukrainian military targets. On the other hand, Ukraine said that Russia launched a full-scale invasion on the country. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmitry Kuleba said Ukraine will defend itself and will win. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announced martial law across the country, severed all diplomatic relations with Russia. Mr. Zelensky also said weapons would be distributed to anyone who wanted them. According to Mr. Zelensky, Russia first launched strikes on Ukraine's military infrastructure and border guard units. After this, Russian military vehicles had crossed the border near Kharkiv in the north, Luhansk in the east, Russian-annexed Crimea in the south, and from Belarus too. Belarus's leader Alexander Lukashenko said his country's military were not involved. Russian tanks were later seen on the outskirts of Kharkiv, a city of 1.4 million people. Russian forces also reportedly landed by sea at Ukraine's major port cities of Odessa on the Black Sea and Mariupol on the internal Sea of Azov. A Ukrainian presidential advisor said that more than 40 soldiers had died and dozens more were wounded. Ukraine also claimed that it had killed 50 Russian troops and shot down 6 Russian aircraft, but this has not been verified. Meanwhile, Russian Foreign Ministry dismissed the Ukrainian claims. Warning sirens blared across the capital, Kyiv, which has a population of almost 3 million. Traffic queued to leave the city and crowds sought shelter in Kyiv's metro stations. Several neighboring countries have begun preparations to take in a large number of refugees. According to RIA Novosti news agency, Russia's defense ministry says its forces have destroyed 74 above-ground military infrastructure facilities in Ukraine, including 11 aerodromes. Meanwhile, Ukraine's National Police Force says attacks are taking place throughout the country. The authorities said they have logged 203 incidents since the beginning of the day when Moscow launched its operations.
United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres called on Russian President Vladimir Putin to stop the operation in the name of humanity shortly after Russia ordered the military operation in eastern Ukraine. Speaking after an emergency meeting of the Security Council, he added that the repercussions of a war would be devastating for Ukraine and far-reaching for the global economy. U.S. President Joe Biden said Washington and its allies would respond in a united and decisive way to an unprovoked and unjustified attack by Russian military forces on Ukraine. France's President Emmanuel Macron said the attack would have deep, lasting consequences for our lives. EU Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell said these are among the darkest hours for Europe since World War II. NATO Chief Jens Stoltenberg has condemned the Russian invasion of Ukraine. At a press conference at the Alliance's headquarters in Brussels, Mr. Stoltenberg said NATO had activated its defense plans, giving military commanders more authority to move and deploy forces when needed. He added NATO had increased its forces in the eastern part of the alliance and will further increase, and we are increasing. Meanwhile, the organization's General Secretary said NATO has no troops inside Ukraine and has no plans to send any into the country.
In response to Russia's massive military build-up, we have already strengthened our collective defense on land, at sea and in the air. In the last weeks, allies from North America and Europe have deployed thousands or more troops to the eastern part of the alliance and placed more on standby. We have over 100 jets at high alert protecting our airspace and more than 120 allied ships at sea from the high north to the Mediterranean. All this shows that our collective defense commitment, Article 5, is ironclad. We will continue to do whatever is necessary to shield the alliance from aggression.
UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has said he spoke to Ukrainian President Zelensky to offer support. In a televised statement on Ukraine, Johnson said their worst fears have come true. He said Russia has unleashed war in Europe and attacked a friendly country without any provocation or credible excuse.
And around the world, this crisis is about the right of a free, sovereign, independent European people to choose their own future. And that is a right that the UK will always defend.
Let's have a look about Ukraine.
With over 6 lakh square kilometer area and more than 40 million population, Ukraine is the second largest country by area and 8th populace in the Europe. Ukraine is bordered by Russia on the east, Belarus on the north, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania and Moldova on the west. It also shares maritime boundary with the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. Ukraine was under different rulers in different eras, including the Ottoman Empire, Russian Empire and the Soviet Union. For decades, Russia and Ukraine were part of the Soviet Union. But after its collapse in 1991, more than 90% of Ukrainians voted to become an independent country, breaking away from the USSR. Ever since, the relationship between Russia and Ukraine has been complicated. The latest episode of the Russian troop display near the Ukraine border is linked to all the previous issues. Not just Russia, but the United States and the European Union also have stakes in Ukraine. Anuja Kumar, World News.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi has conveyed at the Cabinet Committee on Security meeting today that the topmost priority of the government is the safety and security of Indian nationals, including Indian students and their evacuation from Ukraine. Briefing media tonight, Foreign Secretary Harshvardhan Shringla said Prime Minister Narendra Modi is scheduled to speak to Russian President Vladimir Putin shortly.
The topmost priority of the government is the safety and security of Indian nationals, including Indian students, and their evacuation from Ukraine. Prime Minister is scheduled to speak to the President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, shortly. The External Affairs Minister will be speaking to the foreign ministers of the countries neighboring Ukraine.
Mr. Shringla said that there were about 20,000 Indian nationals, including students in Ukraine. Of these, about 4,000 have since left the country. Ministry took a number of members to facilitate flights out of the country. These include removing the cap on the number of passengers that could fly out of Ukraine. He said they also ensured that the number of flights were augmented rapidly from twice a week to 2 flights a day. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar today discussed the Ukraine situation with High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Joseph Borrell Fontanelles. They also discussed how India could contribute to de-escalation efforts. Dr. Jaishankar also held a telephonic discussion with UK Foreign Secretary Liz Truss today. They exchanged perspectives on the Ukrainian situation. The External Affairs Ministry has set up a control room in New Delhi in view of the prevailing situation in Ukraine. The control room will provide information and assistance. The contact details of the control room are 1800118797 toll-free, and these 3 numbers to get any assistance: +911123012113, +911123014104, +911123017905. The Tamil Nadu government has also created a separate help desk for those from the state living in Ukraine. Queries will be addressed at the phone numbers 04428515288 and 9600023645 9940256444.
Indian Embassy in Kiev has written to Ukraine government for the safety and security of Indian students in the country. Over 15,000 Indian students are stranded in the country in various regions. In the letter, the embassy said it would be grateful if the safety and security is ensured and they are allowed to remain wherever they are. It has also requested Ukraine government to make arrangements for providing essential amenities like food and water for their survival. A team from Embassy of India in Hungary has been dispatched to the border post Zohaini to coordinate and provide assistance to facilitate exit of Indians from Ukraine. In a tweet, the mission said it is working with Hungary government to provide all possible assistance. India is closely monitoring the situation and evacuation plans are being worked out. External Affairs Ministry teams are also being sent to the land borders with Ukraine in Poland, Slovak Republic and Romania. The team from Poland is on its way to Krakowiak land border with Ukraine. The team from Slovak Republic is on its way to Vaisny Nemek land border, and the team from Romania is on its way to Suceava.
Minister of State for External Affairs V. Muralidharan said the Union government is working on alternative measures on a war footing to bring home Indians stranded in Ukraine after that country closed its airspace amid Russia's military action. He urged students in Ukraine and their parents back home not to panic. In today's Hotspot section, we bring you a discussion on developments in Ukraine. In conversation are Dilip Sinha, former diplomat, and Sanjay Jha, journalist.
Russia's President Vladimir Putin ordered a military operation in Ukraine's eastern Donbas region, but what's been launched goes far further and amounts to full-scale attack on the country. Ambassador Sinha, how do you see this development?
This is a very serious development. Many people had believed that President Putin would threaten but refrain from taking military action, and that this was brinkmanship, but they would not cross the Rubicon when it came to taking military action. But obviously these optimists have been proved wrong. President Putin has gone in for not just a limited military operation, but what seems like a full-scale military operation. By a limited military operation, I mean a military operation which would have been confined to the Donbas region, which is the region that has now been recognized by Russia as an independent country, and the troops would be moving in to protect the people there. But it seems from reports that there is shelling of other towns, including the capital Kyiv, Odessa, the port of Ukraine. Now, these are areas outside the disputed area of Donbas region. So the military action seems to be a full-scale military operation. It's a full-scale military invasion, although President Putin calls it a special military operation. So it's a situation fraught with grave danger.
As you rightly said, situation is fraught with great danger, and Moscow had launched an all-out invasion of Ukraine by land, air and sea this early morning. I mean, it's the biggest attack by one state against another in Europe since World War II. European Union has said it's one of the darkest hours for the Europe since World War II, and Russia will be hit with massive sanctions. So all these powers, they have been negotiating, they have been trying to persuade President Putin not to go for such an offensive, but it seems to have the diplomacy has failed.
Yes, quite certainly. I don't think diplomacy was given much of a chance, but whatever little chance it was given has failed. Why I say that diplomacy was not given much of a chance is that the Security Council never really intervened in the matter. Now has the UN Secretary General been able to send a special envoy, as he usually does, to when there's a crisis in Asia or in Africa. But in this crisis in Europe, it is the big powers who were talking to each other themselves. So President Macron and Chancellor Scholz went across to Moscow. But the rhetoric was very high from the very beginning. And President Biden took a very strident stand on the situation. So both sides locked themselves into very unenviable positions, and positions from which they could not withdraw and give diplomacy a chance. The result has been that now when President Putin has thrown the gauntlet and given a challenge to the West is now in a dilemma on how to respond. So far, it has been talking about sanctions and it has imposed sanctions, but this is a completely different situation. The only thing we have to see is how does NATO respond? Now, you mentioned the situation in Europe. Well, Europe has had situations of this kind in the past also, whether it was in the breakup of Yugoslavia or the Soviet invasion of Hungary and Czechoslovakia. But in the recent past, this is certainly unprecedented and extremely dangerous.
The Ukraine crisis also creates a big dilemma for our country. Foreign Minister Dr. Jaishankar is meeting investors from the European countries this week, and we have seen people have been trying to flee the capital Kyiv, and there is a palpable sense of shock. Thousands of our students and other citizens are stuck in that country. Although India tried to evacuate them in the last few days, but still there are so many people still stuck. What is India going to do in this crisis?
Well, India's ambassador to the UN and the Security Council has appealed for de-escalation of the situation and giving diplomacy a chance to resolve the matter. But it's a great situation, a dilemma for India, both on the political front and on the humanitarian front. You mentioned the humanitarian aspect of the fact that there are about 20,000 Indians over there, most of them students who are studying in various universities and colleges in Ukraine. They have to be evacuated. Their families would be very worried in India, and they would put pressure upon the government to try and evacuate them as quickly as possible. In these situations, there's always a dilemma as to when to leave, because most people feel that there would not be a war. Therefore, they stay on till the very last, and then when shelling actually starts and the airport shuts down, then they are left with no option but to flee across the border, and there are all kinds of difficulties. So for India, that is a difficult situation on finding ways to evacuate. Now, of course, evacuating through the Kyiv airport is out of the question. They'll have to move across by land to some neighboring countries and then be evacuated. And then there you have issues of visas, because the Indian passport, your visa is limited to the country that you're given the visa to. But there's also the larger dilemma of India's taking sides between Russia and the US. We have good relations with both countries, and we don't want a situation where either side feels let down by India's stand. So India has carefully trod the middle path by not having to make any value judgment on the situation yet, and highlighting the humanitarian problem that we are facing today.
And you rightly said, because an aerospace is not available in the capital city of Kyiv, there's a high-level meeting in Indian government, and they're developing contingency plans. But there's one interesting development. Ukrainian ambassador to India has said the Prime Minister Modi can convince President Putin from stopping this war. You think India can have such a leverage on President Putin?
I don't think we have much of a leverage on President Putin, because he is obviously too far down the line to listen to advice coming from India. But nevertheless, I think the appeal that was made by our PR in the Security Council certainly amounts to an appeal to Russia to control its forces. Now, whether Prime Minister Modi will speak to Putin or not, I can't say. But certainly, I think all-out effort should be made by all political leaders to see to it that this situation does not escalate any further, and diplomacy is given a chance.
At the beginning of our discussion, we said that President Biden has said that the world will hold Russia accountable. What does he mean by that? Do you think there could be a sort of army from different countries going and stopping the Russians
Well, accountability, of course, rests with Russia because they are the ones who have used force in entering the territory of another country. But whether this accountability will stretch to something more than sanctions remains to be seen. Ukraine is not a member of NATO, so NATO is not obliged under the treaty to step in and defend Ukraine. But given the rhetoric that has been used in the past, it is possible, if the situation deteriorates, for NATO to use force. Now, that would be a first in Europe after the Second World War, because so far, whether NATO carried out actions, let us say, in Yugoslavia, or earlier the Soviet Union carried out actions against Hungary and Czechoslovakia, in those cases, other side did not intervene. So it remained a unilateral action of one or the other power alliance. If NATO intervenes in Ukraine now, it will lead to a direct military confrontation between superpowers, Russia and the US, or Russia and NATO. And that will obviously escalate very rapidly into a war that will be very destructive for Europe as well as for the rest of the world.
Some quarter in the world is saying that Putin is spinning a conspiracy theory that Ukraine is plotting to acquire nuclear weapons. Putin has also threatened that anyone who tries to interfere will be treated as a full-scale war. So where do we see this coming to an end? UN Security Council has not really played its role, and we saw a tense exchange between Russian ambassador, Ukraine's representative to the United Nations when they had a Security Council meeting. So if none of these people are coming to intervene, where is war going to end?
Well, the basic dilemma for the world today is that the main organization created to maintain international peace and security, which is the UN Security Council, has been over the decades completely debilitated by the big powers. The result is that the Security Council is in no position to intervene. It has no powers to do so. And if tomorrow the US introduces a resolution condemning Russia in the Security Council, Russia will veto the resolution. Now, in terms of moral authority, again, the West does not have moral authority because the West has exercised the so-called right or responsibility to protect in Libya and in Yugoslavia, which at that time Russia had criticized. Now, Putin is exercising that same responsibility or right, and he claims that he has the right to go in and protect the Russian minority in Ukraine. So the fact that Kosovo, etc., took place a long time back, over 20-25 years ago, and in this century, this is the first major confrontation. But the fact remains that the Security Council does not have the moral authority to step in. Now, in fact, it cannot step in because Russia will definitely veto any Security Council action. So the only denouement that we can see of it is that NATO will accept that Russia has taken over certain parts of Ukraine and silenced the government, or it will intervene militarily and escalate it into a full-fledged war of two major powers.
You spoke about how Russians can veto in the Security Council. Another very important member, China, seems to have a dilemma, just like India. On this occasion, we have seen the President Jinping and Putin have placed closer cooperation, and now they're growing economic ties between Beijing and Kyiv. So how is the Chinese seeing this development? Because this unfolding crisis in Ukraine is posing a big diplomatic dilemma for China, because they cannot, while they're sort of trying to develop a relationship with Russians, same time they have a business relationship with Ukrainians.
Well, China also has the same dilemma that India does. China has excellent relations with Europe. It has very good relations with Russia. As you mentioned, it has investments in Ukraine. So a crisis will immediately affect its investments and also force it to take sides. Now, China has also been unhappy with the annexation of Crimea, which China has not recognized so far. And China, like India, also stands by the territorial integrity of countries. So China will be worried about chunk of Ukraine declaring itself independent and then getting recognized by Russia. So this principle of breaking up a country makes it very difficult for countries to endorse.
You know, coming back to what exactly does President Putin want in Ukraine? Does he want to annex the whole country to Russia and make a bigger sort of USSR, What exactly is the motive of this military strike?
Well, there are various theories about what Mr. Putin wants. One can only guess that. One is that Mr. Putin wants to be given respect. That's what some people have said. But in addition, it's also quite clear now that Putin wants to protect the Russian minority in Ukraine, and relations between the Ukrainians and the Russian minority in Ukraine have been deteriorating in the recent past, and President Putin has accused Ukraine of persecuting the Russian minority. And therefore, this military operation that he has launched, he has defended by saying he is going to protect the Russian minority. So it appears that if that is the limited objective of President Putin, then it is possible to have some kind of a quid pro quo worked out where the Russian minority population of Donbass is allowed certain rights either as a semi-independent or as an independent region, and the rest of Ukraine is left out of the military operation. But that remains to be seen.
You mentioned about Russian perspective about this attack. The Ukrainians have been asking this question to Russians, that what are you fighting for and with whom? And Ukrainian President Zelensky spoke through a video to the Russians. So from Ukrainian perspective, what is the road ahead for them?
Ukraine is in a very difficult situation. The Ukrainian president has taken a very strong, very strident stance. He did not implement the Minsk agreement signed some 8 years ago, which was to give autonomy to this region of Donbass. So he obviously did not play his cards correctly. He misread Russian intentions. And now he's in a dilemma because he has been confronted with the Russian military power and he doesn't know how to deal with it. If he had perhaps handled it a little more carefully, he could have possibly worked out some kind of an arrangement. But he possibly hoped that NATO would come to his rescue. But whether NATO comes to his rescue or doesn't, in both situations, Ukraine as the center of a war will get destroyed if there is military operation from NATO, or if there is no military operation from NATO, in which case the Russian forces may actually walk in even beyond the Donbass region into the rest of Ukraine and take more territory.
In fact, some of the news reports are saying that the Russian ground forces have already crossed into Ukraine. At the same time, the world leaders, French President Macron has called for a NATO summit as soon as possible to bring the peace between two countries. Let's hope that the peace prevails soon. Thank you so much for your time, Ambassador Sinha.
Thank you.
This is All India Radio giving you the news. For quick news updates round the clock, follow us on Twitter at AIR News Alerts. News just in. Prime Minister Narendra Modi spoke on telephone a short while ago with Russian President Vladimir Putin. President Putin briefed the Prime Minister about the recent developments regarding Ukraine. Prime Minister reiterated his long-standing conviction that the differences between Russia and the NATO group can only be resolved through honest and sincere dialogue. Prime Minister appealed for an immediate cessation of violence and called for concerted efforts from all sides to return to the path of diplomatic negotiations and dialogue.
Amongst global markets, Asian markets and European markets around the world rattled after Russia declared war on Ukraine, sending stocks tumbling and crude oil prices surging. The Asian market mostly tanked. In cricket, India defeated Sri Lanka by 62 runs in the first T20 international of the three-match series at Lucknow on Thursday. After setting a target of 200 runs, India restricted Sri Lanka to 137 for 6 in 20 overs.
A quick look at the headlines once again. Russia launches special military operation on Ukraine's eastern Donbass region. Russia claims it has destroyed 74 Ukrainian military facilities, including 11 air bases. Ukraine says it will defend its territory. US, EU and NATO condemn the military attacks in Ukraine. Evacuation plan for stranded Indian nationals in Ukraine being worked out, says External Affairs Ministry. Prime Minister Narendra Modi spoke with Russian President Vladimir Putin about Ukraine's situation. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar discusses Ukraine's situation with High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy. Stock markets around the world tumble as Russia attacks Ukraine. And in cricket, India defeats Sri Lanka in first T20 of three-match series in Lucknow. And now, before we end, let us listen to Mahatma Gandhi's favorite bhajan, Vaishnav Jan, by artists from Estonia on their Independence Day.
Vaishnava Jana to tene kahi jai piri parahi jane pare dukhe upakar kare tu ye mane abhimane nare
With that, we end this bulletin. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.